wait like 2 minutes until all attendings connected. Good afternoon and welcome to this EUGLOH Sustainable Development Week's e-conference on sustainable cities and communities, resilient urbanism, building inclusive, safe and sustainable cities for all. And as you know, this session is aligned with Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 11. I'm Carmen of the University of Alcalá, and I will be the moderator of this panel. As you know, this session is organized during the European Sustainable Development Week as a part of the EUGLOH Alliance's contribution to this essential initiative aimed at raising awareness and promoting sustainable action across Europe. The EUGLOH Sustainable Development Weeks bring together experts, academics, and students from 9 different partner universities to share knowledge, investigation, and to foster collaboration between different perspectives toward a more sustainable future. Today's presentation will explore key topics such as inclusive cities, why furthering justice and sustainable are two sides of the same coin, by Sultan Bahmouti, the role of cities in sustainable transition by Luis Carvalho, and a mapping of sustainability initiatives across the EUGLOH Alliance by Christian Ilter. We aim to foster meaningful dialogue and share valuable insights of these topics. So after the presentations, a Q&A session will be held for your questions. You can write your questions in the chat and we will read them. And remember that this session will be recorded and it will be available on the YouTube channel within some weeks. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Sultan Bahmouti. He's professor at the Faculty of Economics and Business Administration and at the Institute of Ecological Economics at the University of Szeged. And he is specialized in inclusive cities. His work focuses on drawing attention to various layers of inclusive cities through the case of people with disabilities and in particular blind and visually impaired people. The floor is yours, Sultan.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And in this brief presentation, I'm going to talk about inclusive cities. So I would like to bring in some ideas about social justice into the discussion around sustainability. First, I would like to make 3 very simple arguments why talking about social justice and talking about sustainability is not just interlinked, but basically they are really 2 sides of the same coin. And then I'm going to briefly touch upon the concept of inclusive cities through our example with working with blind and visually impaired people in Szeged. So let's begin. So my first argument is that sustainable development by definition is about furthering justice. If you think about the definition, the widely known definition provided by the report Our Common Future, it says sustainable development is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it seems that we think it is important to preserve certain opportunities for members of the future generations. But if those opportunities are important, that we want to preserve them for the future generations, then probably they are also important to be enjoyed by members of the current generation, which is very often not the case. So we know that a large proportion of the current generations cannot enjoy even such basic opportunities like access to clean drinking water, safe living environment, freedom from forced work, or access to green spaces, and so on and so forth. So basically, furthering sustainability is about furthering inter- and intra-generational justice. Second, very simple argument is that if we stop focusing on economic growth, then fair distribution will have to gain more attention. As we know it today, a growing economy comes together with increasing environmental impact. Nevertheless, most of the cities, most of the governments, most of the nations still strive for more economic growth, apart from on the top of other objectives. And this has many reasons. Even the UN SDGs name economic growth as one of their objectives, however controversial it is. So this has many reasons, but one of the reasons is that if we stick to growth, we can try to stick to the well-known growth allows everyone to become richer argument. So we're going to have a bigger cake, so everyone might have a bigger share. Unfortunately, this does not happen in reality. And should we abandon this idea of sticking to growth, and once we state that the cake is not getting any bigger, then of course we have to think about the share one gets, so we have to turn to dealing with social justice. And my last argument in this line is that it is easier to commit to a positive vision. So when we invite people to think about sustainability transition, do we provide a vision for all of the citizens or just a few? Do we invite them to a dystopic vision when we talk about decreased material welfare, having to give up consumption, having to compete for survival? Or we invite them to focus on what is more important in life, a meaningful life, doing it together and trying to build a vision where everyone has a place. For me, this latter is, of course, more appealing. But if we do that, of course, we have to think about justice and fairness. So if we agree, then furthering sustainability cannot be done without furthering justice, then of course it makes a lot of sense to talk about inclusive cities when we talk about sustainable cities and communities. According to Nancy Fraser, justice in the city is basically the possibility of full participation of the citizens. Participation can mean economic participation, having a fair share, or socio-cultural participation. We are recognized as equal member of a community, and of course political participation. But we know very well that cities at present do not necessarily or typically provide these possibilities for all their citizens. For example, if you think of people with disabilities, certain minorities, people in extreme poverty, or elderly people, and so on, they do not enjoy the same access to the city. They do not enjoy the same possibility of full participation. So in the remaining time, I would like to show you one example from our own practice here in Szeged, the case of blind and visually impaired people. We're having a long-term cooperation with the blind and visually impaired community here in the city and a little bit beyond the borders of the city as well. So researchers and members of advocacy organization work together alongside research, education, and activism. And as a recent step, we are running a project now, which we entitled The Smart City Should Be For All, where we would like to understand, do blind people have the possibility for full participation in the more and more digitalized smart cities? And what we can say is that in the digitalized city, physical design is of course still very important. If you think about the tactile pavings, accessible transport vehicles, accessible buildings, acoustic street lights, those are still, of course, very important, remain very important. But apart from this, or on the top of this, accessibility in the digital space has become vital for blind people to be able to enjoy the services of the city. Because almost all of our services in the city have digital components now, or been completely transferred to the digital space, such as healthcare, education, transportation, public administration, banking, all of these shopping, all of these basic services of the city are now to a large extent digitalized. And there might be a lot of barriers in this digital space which doesn't allow full access for blind and visually impaired people. For example, the applications or website are coded in a way that they are not readable for the screen readers, or drop-down menus, pop-up windows, time limits for identification, use of facial recognition systems are all examples for inaccessible digital design, which then makes the services of the city inaccessible for some of those citizens. So as one of our colleague put it on this quote, they see that there's a big problem on the software engineer side because they design as if they don't even think that visually impaired people might be using those systems in the future. So to give you one example, what happens if we design our cities without the blind in mind? Micromobility, a service of the city we might think has nothing to do with blind people, but basically e-scooters have become one of the biggest health risks for blind people walking the streets of the city. They just simply cannot detect ill-parked scooters and fall over it, which causes serious injuries. E-scooter systems are complex digitalized systems with GPS tracking, applications, online payment, and so on. It is possible to design such systems which allows the user to park and lock the vehicle even when it's ill-parked in the middle of the sidewalk, and design in a way that the parking space is taken away basically from the sidewalks. Or we can design such system in a way which makes it necessary to park it properly, and where the parking space is designated at the expense of cars. Such difference in the design of our systems make a huge impact on the basic freedom of blind people to walk around safely in the city. On the other hand, what if we designed our city with the blind people in mind? I argue that perhaps we would have better cities then. We would probably have walkable cities with wide sidewalks. We would put emphasis on public transportation over cars. And we would have more inclusive workplaces. We would have easy to use, logically designed digital services. We may ask others more often if they need assistance. And maybe not just people, but also dogs would be welcome everywhere. For me, that seems to be a vision for the city worth working for. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Sultan, for this interesting presentation and necessary perspective of sustainability. Do we have any question from the audience? Okay. Emily asked, how can urban planners and technologists can collaborate to ensure that new technologies promote inclusion rather than exclusion?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. So my brief answer would be to first of all engage with the communities we are designing for. So we cannot design working or well-working solution most likely if we do not engage in conversation with blind people, with wheelchair-using people, with autistic people, with deaf and hard of hearing people. So engage with these communities, and from the planner's side, to be aware that what we do has ethical and, in a broad sense, political implication, because our systems will impact people's possibility to fully participate in the city. So through our systems, we might exclude certain communities. On the other hand, we might build a more inclusive space for them. So we might also empower them.
Thank you. And now Diane thanks you for this fantastic presentation. And she said that, to be honest, I have only heard of the concept of universal design once or twice. How broad is this idea of designing for multiple types of people among architects, for example?
Thank you very much. Yes, universal design or design for all. These are concepts which try to grasp this idea to try to design our system while keeping in mind the diversity of all citizens. And since I'm not an architect, I can't really tell you how popular it is. What we see is that these ideas are gaining more and more attention. However, in my experience, there might be still room for a little bit more co-designing. So I think the design for all, or the universal design, should also embrace the idea of doing it together. So co-design for all, basically that would be the best way to describe what we are striving for. And of course, we can elaborate on this later a little bit at the end of the session.
Okay, thank you again, Sultan. Now our second speaker is Luis Carvalho. He's associate professor at University of Porto, and he's an expert in economics and management. And today he's going to tell us about the role of cities in sustainability transitions. The floor is yours, Luis.
Thank you very much, Carmen. I trust that you can all see the slides now. Okay, thank you very much again for the invitation to take part in this very nice workshop and webinar. Well, I've just planned to bring you some ideas that I've been reflecting upon over the last years on the role of cities on sustainability transitions. It's a bit of a broad approach, but I hope that we can discuss it further during the follow-up. I also have a few reflections about which kind of challenges I see nowadays when it comes to the role of cities in this broader process of what is a sustainability transition, but I'll come back to that in the last slide. I would say that if we attend the presentations about sustainability transitions nowadays, we would very likely start with this kind of picture, the idea that we have indeed quite a lot of things that are going wrong in many ways in the world. Of course, cities are eventually the scenarios where we can see this coming up more vividly. Of course, we always think about issues of traffic, the issues on congestion and mobility, and all the connections that it has with pollution. We have obviously very serious issues when it comes to energy consumption associated with living. Cities are more and more producing a lot of waste that we cannot really make rid of very easily. And of course, if you pay attention to these issues, you have been witnessing a lot of extreme event weathers in cities, like severe fires in LA, flooding in Valencia. So overall, I think this gives us a picture that we have many spheres in our society that are not actually working in a proper manner, that we could consider in a way unsustainable. I'm not going into depth into the notion of sustainability here, but I very much like this idea of the donut by an economist called Kate Raworth, that she tries to describe in which areas we are overshooting our capacity, and she tries to map the fields in which we are actually exceeding planetary boundaries. And these green areas are actually the dimensions which this is going up more severely in some ways. And of course, although cities are not the only places where you can see this happening, they are perhaps the spots where this becomes more vividly to our attention. So I like very much this notion of sustainability transition, the idea that societies, to deal with these problems that I just showed you, they have to go through processes of change, and they have to change the way they provide a lot of services in our society. For example, I kind of like, again, this donut-like picture that you see here in the screen. Well, if you look closely, it suggests that a big issue is that the systems that provide services that we need for our lives, they nowadays consume a lot of resources, and they also produce a lot of waste and emissions. Here we could speak about the way we are producing energy, the way we are moving in space, the way we are producing and consuming food. So I think that most of us would agree that these are spheres in which some attention has to be put. But the problem here, and this is why we speak about a transition, is that bringing change into these domains, it's much easier said than done, because it's not simply about the question of technology. For all these things, I would say that nowadays we have technologies that could, in a way, address some of the challenges. But what you see around here, around the systems, like the ideas of user practices, infrastructure, policy, the way markets work, they are actually creating additional challenges, and they work in some kind of a system that it's not very easy to change, and suddenly it's not possible to change by decree. For example, if you look into issues related with mobility, and I would say that many of us would agree that the way mobility systems work in large cities are in a way unsustainable in many ways. You can clearly see that this is not just an easy question to solve, because many dimensions operate around that. So you might even have cleaner cars, but then changing consumer practices, the changing infrastructure, dealing with the way us as consumers perceive the value of an automotive is actually something quite different, quite difficult to change. And this is how we actually position what a sustainability transition is. For us, at least for the people that work in this sphere, it's a way to over time create change not only in the core of the system, but in all the components that make a certain system work. And we could make a similar exercise for energy, for food, for health, and for other types of systems that provide for our daily lives in society. So coming here, you might be wondering, so what's the role of cities here? Of course, many of the challenges that I just showed you, they cannot be solved by one city alone. Many of them, they are not even specifically city-based. So many people over the last years, they have been thinking and developing some ideas about what could be the role of cities as places and as agents to deal with this kind of problems. On the one hand, we know that cities are obviously generators of these problems. Many of these system tensions, they are very visible at the level of cities. But to me, an important part of this equation is the fact that cities are also the places where the solutions will tend to emerge and to be nurtured over time. And here I have a few points that they really make clear what can cities do in this respect. For example, we know that for many of these challenges, cities usually they have very high ambitions. You know, if you look into Nordic cities, for example, the ambition to become climate neutral and all the kind of incentives in place, they really create good environments and a good setting to try to experiment with new ways of doing things. So in a sense, you can see cities as some sort of a fast boat that can change direction a bit faster than if you think at the level of a country as a whole. What is also very important when you consider cities is that this type of scale and this type of actors, for example, if you think about local policymakers, they have some kind of strategic agency, so they are actually tasked with dealing with this kind of things. For example, when it comes to transport, waste, energy issues, a lot of responsibilities sit at the side of municipalities. So because of that, you see that there's some kind of strategic action and ambitions to work and eventually work faster to change some of these issues. But beyond that, what you also see is that cities are very interesting ecosystems for learning. If you start thinking about new solutions and new ways to solve, even if slowly, to solve some of these challenges, you'll find that this has to be experimented before. It has to be tested among many different types of actors and constituencies. And Zoltan, before me, just spoke about the issue of how to deal with visually impaired people in the city. Well, this is a clear example where to deal with a certain issue, you need to create an ecosystem of people around it to discuss it. And we know that this kind of ecosystems, they tend to work better when they are operationalized in closer proximity. What I feel that is also very interesting in the case of cities is that they create some kind of social environment in which you can visualize what the solution would be. And I think this is very important when you discuss sustainability issues, because some of the solutions that might come to our mind to solve a sustainability problem, they don't mean the same thing for everybody. Some of them are actually very difficult to bring concrete. For example, if we speak about sustainability, each one of us will have a different idea about what this is about. But in cities, you can actually pin down these ideas and connect some kind of imaginary with a concrete action. And I think, again, this is a very important, strong point of thinking about the transition at the level of cities and municipalities. Obviously, cities have a very important lobbying power with national levels of decision making. Sometimes they are big advocates of solutions. And very important, if you look into some cities, there are also places that are very well connected to other parts of the world. They actually tend to influence what happens not only in a specific city, but also beyond the level of that city. So I see like this issue of connectedness and the ability to influence others as a very powerful role of cities. Of course, we can think about whether this ambition and the kind of actions that cities are doing nowadays to deal with sustainability transitions, whether this is gaining ground or somehow losing momentum. So this would be my last reflection that I would like to leave open for the debate, because on the one hand, of course, we see that there is a lot of attention put into cities nowadays when it comes to sustainability transitions. Of course, we are here in a webinar focusing on SDG 11, which is obviously very much focused in all these kind of issues that we are discussing. We see a lot of funding coming up to experiment new solutions and to conceive more sustainable ways of living in cities. We have networks of mayors. Smart cities and climate neutral cities became a very important mission at the level of the EU. So if we just look at this side of the coin, we would tend to say that yes, cities are actually becoming more and more important, and more attention is being put into these issues. But at the same time, you can also see it from the reverse side, and you see that there is actually nowadays a lot of hesitation, because we noticed that over the last years, eventually some of the ambitions that cities will be able to deal with these issues and create new solutions for sustainability problems, they didn't actually materialize to some extent. What we have witnessed was a lot of temporary pilots and small projects that never actually made inroads beyond a certain local context. Many of them, because this is of course a drawback of the city scale, is that you tend to focus on small improvements, and these improvements, they don't bring together larger coalitions. Obviously, another issue, and I think it was also a bit before in Zoltan's presentation, is the lack of citizen engagement. Many times we still focus on technology solutions, and we tend to put a bit aside the engagement of other stakeholders. And obviously, we know that the political environment nowadays in Europe and beyond is not particularly favorable to some environmental priorities, and we see a lot of new things coming up in the political agenda that somehow eschew this kind of interventions. So just to conclude, I'll say that it becomes very important nowadays actually to try to understand in which specific places and in which specific ways this kind of experiments in cities actually made their ways to bring to the fore relevant transitions. We don't know too much about that yet, but I'll say that it's important, and I like very much this last sentence that you see here. It's important, even if we are a bit skeptical nowadays about what can cities do per se to change the situation. I think we should not throw out the baby with the bathwater, because I still believe that cities are obviously a very important intervention zone to deal with sustainability issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis, for your presentation. Now, Luis, have a question for you. What challenges do cities face when trying to implement sustainability transitions, and how can they overcome them? And also, if you can share examples of cities that have successfully driven sustainable transitions other than in Norway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think many cities are working actively on that. Some of them are obviously more successful than others. A case that I know relatively well is the case of Amsterdam. Well, Amsterdam has been conducting a lot of successful experiments in terms of urban transitions. Of course, you can wonder whether this really made inroads to really change the way the city operates. But I think they have been doing that very cleverly in the way they try to put in practice this kind of pilots, the way they involve citizens into the discussion. And a challenge here is that you don't see this happening very smoothly and very fast. course. When you put in place this kind of pilots and intentions, you see that many of the results you will only see in eventually decades. But there are things that they stay out of the discussion. For example, when we did this research there, we noticed that out of these pilots, municipalities, they started to procure technology and to deal with procurement services in a completely different way. So you can wonder if this is already a transition or not. I'll call it already a very strong step in, in change.
Thank you, Luis. And now Joey asks if are there certain groups of people, like by age, for example, that are not as willing to change, or is it relatively common amongst all consumer groups?
Yeah, I have difficult to give a very substantial answer to that. I never really studied that in depth. But I'll say the challenges are transversal. Of course, the type of challenge that you have in engaging different age cohorts are perhaps different. But we also found situations, for example, in which like older demographics, they were very much willing and active to change the way of doing things. So because of that, I don't really have a clear-cut answer to that. We tend to think that, okay, the younger they are, more willing and so on, but I'll be a bit more skeptical about this is always generalizable in that sense.
Okay, thank you, Luis. We have another question, but we will answer it at the end of all the presentations.
Okay.
Now, our third speaker is Christian Iltern. He's a student assistant of EUGLOH team, and he's specialized in information systems. Today, he presents his research, mapping sustainability initiatives across the EUGLOH Alliance. Now the floor is yours, Christian.
Yes, thank you. Somehow I can't activate my camera, but I think that's fine for solo. All right. I hope you can see my screen. I have to. All right. Yep. Okay, thank you for having me here in this webinar. I want to present our initiative of trying to map sustainability initiatives across the UGLO Alliance. First, I want to get and talk about the main idea, what is this all about. So we have these 9 universities in our alliance, and all of these have huge campuses with many engaged students, academics and staff, and working towards sustainability and creating local initiatives. And we tried to having one map centralized where you can see all these kind of initiatives in a centralized map. And this solves two problems, or we have two use cases for this. For once, we wanted to have the use for new students visiting other campuses to see where they can engage with sustainability and visit, for instance, sustainable locations, or where they can rent a bike or repair something. And for the other side, we also wanted to have like sort of this strategic overview where we can see what the universities already are doing and how we can share best practices and knowledge. For this, we designed and processed how we can obtain these locations overall. For once, we created a survey who then we distributed across all the universities and tried to collect as many locations as possible. And then we mapped it in Google My Maps. So we obtained several data from students, administrative staff, and academics, and especially from students who we like to thank because they know especially the secret knowledge of these locations and initiatives directly at the campus. And for me, creating this map or making this implementation in my maps, it's also a practical challenge of not having the local expertise, and this worked quite well. So the result at the end was this map where you have pinned all of these sustainable locations, and you can zoom in and then look of all these locations and have an overview which kind of initiatives these universities already have. So for instance, if you zoom in the University of Munich, the LMU, you can see and click on one pin and see there's one park at this location near the campus where you can spend your free time if you visit the Munich University. Yes, then we also implemented this app towards our website under initiatives and sustainability map, where you can see and access this information. This is how it looks at the end if you then click on, for instance, the map of University of Hamburg. Then you can also zoom in and see all the locations we mapped. Here I also shared the link. I will shortly share it also in the chat, so you can also exit it. Thank you, Kristen. Already shared it. So what are our next goals? So we have to update existing locations and revise every location again to make the overall displaying more coherent, and we have to add more locations to make it more interesting and appealing towards different stakeholder and target groups. Yes, that's it for so now, and I want to thank you for listening towards my presentation of this sustainability map initiatives of the UPSaclay Alliance.
Thank you, Christian, for your presentation. We have a person who says that it is a great initiative and ask about what challenges did you face in collecting and visualizing such diverse sustainability initiatives, and if is there a plan to promote this map and update it at each university over the time?
A great question. Thank you for asking. So throughout the process, we faced several challenges. For most, was it to get the survey to the right person who knows exactly what kind of initiatives we have. Also, before we created the survey, we had lots of feedback rounds debating what we define as sustainability and what kind of categories we want to collect and what kind of locations. From now, we want to promote this map only via our UGLOH Alliance network website, and we haven't thought about exactly how we want to update it, but I think for sure we will use this as a kickoff and as a start to, well, increase the locations and the map and the data we already have.
Okay, thank you, Christian. And now the floor is open to all participants for questions. Please type your question in the chat and I will read them aloud for the panel. And in the meantime, I'll read some questions that are waiting for an answer. The first one was for Sultan. And Maya wants to know, how do you engage with the people you want to help? How do you find out what blind people really need or want from their cities?
Thank you for this question. So in our case, this is really a long-term cooperation. So it happens through tiny steps and actions which helped us to build trust. So one of the first action was that we invited the advocacy organization to one of our service learning courses where students learn through volunteering. And then the next step was that we invited them to come to the university because we wanted to learn from them. So we said that, okay, I think the uni is not doing that well in terms of accessibility. So could you please help us to build a strategy or a plan to make the uni more accessible? So and then this led to joint research actions where they brought the question, and we tried to answer those questions either together with students in the form of a course or just the researchers, the trained researchers. So in our case, basically, it was a long trust building process and various ways of cooperating. But what was very important is that it had to be beneficial for both parties. So they knew something, they were eager to learn, and we also might know something which was interesting for the blind community. So it's the mutually beneficial cooperation we were trying to go for.
Thank you very much. Now we have two questions for Luis. The first one is if it is harder in cities with a higher rate of poverty, for example, where consumers have less choice about their choices.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll be a bit skeptical about making that statement and to bring it very boldly in that way, because you can also find similar problems in very affluent communities. For example, we know that very affluent people, they tend to consume also a lot of energy and they don't care so much about savings, for example. So, and that might not be the case, for example, in less affluent contexts. But it's a difficult relation. For example, it's a problem when we are studying transitions, and then we go to places like like what we call the global south. And in fact, the way technologies are used there, the way people deal and engage with energy, for example, is really completely different. I would say it's not that it's more difficult, but we need to look into that with a different eyes.
Thank you, Luis. And another question for you from Antonia. She thanks for your presentation and she would like to ask how to measure sustainability in cities.
Yes. Well, we have many ways to do that. All of them are a bit incomplete. So just finding the best way to do it, I would say it's also misleading. For example, the case I showed you, like this donut by Kate Rowett, it's being used in many cities nowadays, like municipalities are using that framework. And of course, it's based on all sorts of data and indicators to try to see where we are overshooting and undershooting in different dimensions. So this kind of frameworks, they can be an interesting way to get at least a first picture about the situation. But I'll say that what is also very important is not to lose sight of the soft aspects of a transition. And those are not very easily grasped through this kind of indicator type of sustainability measurement. For example, we should also pay attention to not necessarily measure, but to assess how our policymaking routines changing, how our consumer habits going in different ways. And that, of course, we cannot do just with this kind of dashboard-like framework, but I see that we should complement them in a clever way.
Thank you. Now I'm going to read the question of Adriati. Excellent and inspiring presentations, professors. I'm interested in ecological linguistics, bringing linguistics and applied linguistics into the ecological dimension and sustainability vision and activism. An example of this field of study is to bring the ecological perspective and activism in language classroom. How would you see this new emerging field, and how can we situate this into the context of SDGs, especially the 11th one? It's for both, I think.
Okay. Okay. May I go first then? Okay. Well, thank you for this question. And I am not sure I am going to be able to give you a proper answer, but I can tell you where I have come across this the issue of language and why I think it's vital. So, of course, in terms of inclusivity, in terms of who do we acknowledge, accept as equal citizen of a city, language use is absolutely vital. Beginning from how we talk about, for example, disabled people or certain minorities, or how you what kind of languages allow you to reach your goals in the city. But I also see another field which is very interesting, is to have discussions over the meanings assigned to certain words. And just to give you an example, limit seems to be a vital concept around sustainability. And we very often talk about limit as something coming from the outside. So we cannot go on consuming that much, we cannot travel that much, we cannot do this or that in the future because the environment is going to limit us. But I think we might it might be worthwhile to reframe the word of limit to something that is coming from inside. Why don't we start to limit ourselves, to try to focus on things that are important to our life, not want to consume everything because it doesn't make sense. So I think there's a huge space here to have discussions around the language actually we use and the discourses we build through these words and expressions we use. I hope it was at least somewhat of an answer.
Yes, I think I will not risk to go much beyond what Zoltan has just said. I'm not actually a specialist in the field, but I'm very keen on connecting sustainability debates with human and social sciences. I think that's a fundamental issue. And also the issue of linguistics and humanities is obviously a very important part of the equation. In my field, it's a bit neglected. We tend to look into numbers and statistics and things that we conceive to be a bit harder and not prone to be discussed in terms of semantics. But obviously, when we are dealing with sustainability, all kind of social constructions, language constructions, they really play a very fundamental role. So I would simply like to know even a bit more about that, because even when we are engaging with stakeholders in places and we actually notice that they use different language cues, they understand different meanings in different types of words. So bringing this to the fore, I would say it's really fundamental, and it's a pity that we don't have more linguistic and people and researchers working with us in cities to go deeper about that.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Adriadi, for this interesting question. Now, Baptiste, have a question for the two first speakers. How do we measure sustainability in a city when some aspects, like having great infrastructure, such as bike lanes, are positive, but other factors like the city energy sources are still heavily reliant on carbon? And also, are there comprehensive metrics or tools that account for these conflicting elements? And for Christian, sorry, how the idea of the map started originally? That's all.
Shall I start? I think it's very nice to see that many people is interested in the measurement issue. It's really tricky, I would say. I always have difficulties when it comes to measurement things, although I come from a school of economics. I think measuring sustainability issues are really tricky, as it comes implicit in this question. Again, I think we have dashboards and indicators that we can put in place to grasp different dimensions, but as you very rightly say, some of them they tend to conflict among each other. I don't know very specific indicators to flesh out those tensions. But you speak specifically about bike lanes, and I'd say that just having a bike lane per se, it's not necessarily an indication of sustainability. But it's curious because if you put that indicator in a dashboard, and if you say, okay, I don't know how many kilometers of bike lanes, you could be suggesting that, okay, this city is going well in sustainability terms. But if these bike lanes, if they are just empty, then you wonder what this kind of indicator actually tells you. This is why I'm always very careful when it comes to measuring sustainability change, because to really get a good picture, I think you have to dig deeper, and some of those indicators are not very easily available. But maybe I'm a bit too skeptical about that, so I'll just give the floor to to my colleagues.
Uh, so I fully agree with you, and also with the skepticism in a way. So what I would add to this is one common problem we see when when cities or communities or societies are searching for solutions is that since these systems are very complex, sometimes they just shift the problem from one side of the system to another. So that's why measurement also becomes tricky, because at the end of the day, most measurement issues presume that once a problem is addressed at one part of the system, it is not shifted elsewhere. So at the end of the day, basically, what we are interested in is maybe just a few very vital indicators on the use of energy and material in the city, and on the outcome side, the amount of waste or other outcomes of the so-called urban metabolism. But then in some cases, it's not even the level of the city, which is the adequate spatial level of measuring those indicators. So probably this was not a very useful answer because we asked more questions than answers provided. But there are really a lot of dilemmas about measuring sustainability. I think in a way it's easier to take a meaningful step than to measure in this sense.
Okay, I might explain a little bit the history behind this map. So inside our University Alliance, we had this idea of making student services more accessible via an app originally. And we also have an especially dedicated sustainability task force with people who are trying to engage with sustainability, making an impact towards, and trying to work ideas out for these kind of context. And then I think there somehow this idea popped up somewhere that we could create this map of having an aiming of showcasing this local initiatives not via an app, but with a more downsized technical solution with a map.
Thank you for your answers. Now, Luis has a question for Sultan. How can cities with limited budgets can implement effective measures to make their urban environment more inclusive for people with disabilities? And do you know if inclusivity in cities is a concept applied just in Europe or in Western countries, or is this a concern in Eastern countries as well?
Thank you very much. Of course, the most ideal situation would be if cities they're not in the position that they have to take measures afterwards to try to correct some failures of inclusivity, but they were designed in a way that the problem will not arise. And that would also be probably be the most efficient solution in terms of the budget as well. But of course, you are right that in certain cases, so of course there are, for example, lots of applications specifically designed for blind people to help them in their everyday life in the city. That does depend on budget, and in this sense, in some aspects of inclusivity, Western European countries are taking the lead. That's sure. But inclusivity is not necessarily, I think, a concept that is constrained to the West or the global North. So I think in other aspects of inclusivity, there might be cities in the global North which are doing much better than most of the European countries. So how to navigate in a country with loads of official languages like cities of South Africa, Johannesburg, Cape Town. Probably they do it better than any of the European countries are, I would presume. Or taking a real recognition of knowledge of traditional societies, for example, in South America. So there might be many faces of inclusivity and recognizing all citizens' opportunity for full participation. With regard to disability, though I would agree with your diagnosis that it's going better in Western Europe than Eastern Europe so far. However, even in this case, in most of the Western European countries, we still don't really see blind people in the city council. We don't really see blind people as university professors. We don't really say there's a lot to do there too.
Thank you, Sultan. We have another question. Sustainable is often used to refer to environmental factors like greenery or pollution. But what about sustainable lifestyle as a whole? Is their work also ensuring citizens have socio-cultural sustainable lives? How could this be measured?
I may say one or two things. Obviously, this is the key issue when we use words like sustainability. It can mean many things. You are right that we tend to think about the green aspects of sustainability. But for example, if you look again to this idea of donut that I mentioned to you before, this framework that you can use to measure if you are shooting planetary boundaries, for example, uh, this framework is also prepared to measure social foundations, for example. And here it measures the other way around. Like, for example, when you look to planetary boundaries, is whether you are overseeding them. When it comes to social foundation, it's about whether you are lacking in those foundations, and it can be about participation, all kinds of things that are actually the social foundation that are fundamental for sustainable green living. So I'd say that you in these frameworks more and more, because sustainability is a very encompassing notion, you have this in a way, again with all the limitations related with indicators that we just discussed before. But I'll also say that this expression, like sustainable lifestyle, is also a bit politically tricky nowadays. For example, how can you define what is a sustainable lifestyle? I did a study before, well, already a few years ago in Stockholm, for example, where they were developing a new, very flashy, smart digital neighborhood, which was in the vision plan to foster sustainable lifestyles. This was really written like that. It remembers me the question we had before about linguistics. And it turns out that is generating a lot of backlash because many people consider that some kind of too imposing. I remember listening the word of green fascism, because you have to impose a certain type of lifestyle. So it's although we can have a way to measure some of these dimensions, I'd say it's difficult to conceptualize what a sustainable lifestyle is. At least it would be subject to a lot of debate and certainly controversy. So the more this is the case, I think the more difficult it gets to really get a objective appraisal about this kind of dimension.
Okay, thank you. We have no more questions, so thank you all for your active participation and thoughtful questions. Special thanks to the speakers, obviously, for sharing their expertise and dedication of this topic. We also thank all partner universities and the EUGLOH Alliance for organizing this event. And remember that the recording of this session will be available at the EUGLOH YouTube channel within some weeks. And finally, we look forward to seeing you at the next e-conference in the Sustainable Development Week series. Thank you all.
Have a good day.
It's
Have a
been
good
a
day.
pleasure.
Goodbye.
Thank you.